So most Christians that are not Protestant believe in this thing called purgatory. And it's like a way station for souls that aren't good enough to go to heaven. Okay. So if you are a normal person, not the best person, but not the worst person, you're not going to hell. So I wasn't really going to write about those things, but I still thought that they were weird enough, and there were so many of them. The patterns were the same. So I showed a friend of mine, and he looked at them and he said, these look like Steven Spielberg films. They look like UFOs. And honestly, I thought he was crazy. And I was like, no way.
You started studying Purgatory in 2012. And so could you describe Purgatory for the audience, for the people that don't know what
You
that
bet,
is?
sure. So I started it earlier than that. So it was something that I started as soon as I became an assistant professor. And this was in 2002, 2003. And in order to keep that job, you have to publish, which is normal for a professor. So I was interested in, ideas of the afterlife and the soul. These things interested me. And in the Catholic tradition, which is what I was trained in, there's this thing called purgatory. And this is also Eastern Orthodox. So most Christians that are not Protestant believe in this thing called purgatory. And it's like a way station for souls that aren't good enough to go to heaven. Okay. So if you are a normal person, not the best person, but not the worst person, you're not going to hell, right? So you go to this place called purgatory where it's supposed to be a place of purgation where you work off your sins and then that soul goes to heaven. Well, this was a doctrine of the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. And it somehow went away. So it's still a doctrine, but Catholics don't know about it, and they don't pray for souls that are in purgatory anymore. It used to be a huge devotion, and I wanted to know why it disappeared. So I started to do archival research. So archives are are libraries of old manuscripts and books from ancient times to the present. And there's some really great archives in the United States and, of course, at the Vatican. So I started to look in these archives for what Catholics in 1200 and 1300, throughout time, thought of purgatory, basically. And as I was doing that work, I was looking, I was writing a book, like a survey of purgatory. Well, it turns out purgatory was actually a place in Ireland. So there's actually a place, it's still there. It's on a plate on an island called Loch Derg, which is Red Lake, the Red Lake in Ireland. And it was a place where people thought that they could go to a cave, and if they withstood it for 24 hours, their souls would be cleansed after that. And they did this in the late medieval time period till about 1200. Then it became a doctrine.
So they thought that if they could handle being in a cave for 24 hours.
Yeah.
Is there anything substantial about this particular cave?
Yeah. So this cave would have demons and things like that in it. So you have to survive being assaulted by beings of the afterlife in this cave like this. So for the medieval mind, they don't separate out like demons and angels and stuff. Those were part of their reality. So this cave was the place where they could go to an underground area where they could have these battles. And if they survived those battles, their sins would be forgiven. And that's not the only purgatory cave. There was one in Italy as well. So this was where the doctrine kind of like emerged from, and then it became an actual doctrine. And then as time went on, people started to think of it not as a place but as a state of being. So that's how purgatory changed. And I wrote that book. So I wrote that book, but during the study of that book, I came upon aerial phenomena. So Catholics from 1200 up to 1800 saw things in the sky that they couldn't identify. If they did identify, usually you could see it right in the reports too. They're like, we saw this orb. We don't know what it is, but we think it's a soul from purgatory. So we're going to pray it back to where it should go. And so I started to collect these. Sometimes they saw things and they interpreted them as like flying houses. things in the sky. Sometimes they saw things and they thought they were angels. And so I had a lot of these, and I didn't understand what they were, so I kind of put them aside. And I wrote my book on purgatory, and I got that all done, right? And so I had all of these things, and I was on to my next book, by the way, about a Catholic bishop. So I wasn't really going to write about those things, but I still thought that they were weird enough, and there were so many of them. The patterns were the same. So I showed a friend of mine, and he looked at them and he said, "These look like Steven Spielberg films. They look like UFOs." And honestly, I thought he was crazy. And I was like, no way. Those are not UFOs. But a UFO conference was happening in my town that week. So we went to that. And that's where I met people who had sightings of UFOs, and it looked like a pattern match. So when I heard them talk about this, and I was like, this looks exactly like the Catholic reports. That's when I began to do this study into UFOs. That happened in 2012.
Before we go into the UFO stuff, I'm actually very interested in the purgatory
Yeah,
stuff.
absolutely,
So what do you think?
Okay.
So the purgatory originated as a cave?
Well,
As
that was
a
one of
couple of
its
caves.
that was one of its practices. So if you look at the Catholic history of purgatory, the kind of official idea, it basically says, Catholics, we don't know. The Pope would say, we don't know what it is. They tend to try to say it's not a physical place where these souls end up, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they don't know what it is. Is it a spiritual place? They tend to say it's a state of mind or a state of being. So I would look at it like a state of being for the soul.
So it's a realm.
Yeah, like a realm, like another dimension or something like that. We would call it, like when you and I talk, I'd say, Shawn, it's another dimension.
Mm-hmm.
It's another dimension. My soul hopefully will go there. I'm not saying I'm good enough to get into heaven, right? But I'm hoping for purgatory, kind of thing. Like that's what, because I believe in the soul. I also want to say this, that I should have said this earlier, that the things that I'm going to say are my own opinion based on what I've studied and how I've lived, and they don't reflect my university. So my university is a state university. It's not going to be, I won't be publishing a peer-reviewed paper talking about the reality of the soul, but I believe in it. So I'm a believer, absolutely.
So you believe in purgatory?
Probably not like it's described by the Catholic Church. I believe that the soul continues, and I believe that and by the way, this is based on not just what I see in Catholicism. I do comparative religious studies. So what I've read stuff from ancient Egypt, and I've read stuff from Hinduism, and Buddhism, things like that. What almost everything I read about within these religions, and people too that I've spoken with. So, I have a lot of friends who have PhDs in various fields, and I ask them, about what they know about this. It appears that this even goes back to Plato, by the way, and Socrates. This is the Greek tradition, the philosophical tradition. What happens to a soul after it dies, after the body dies, is determined largely by what one does in one's life. So I take that very seriously.
Yeah, me too. Does the Bible, is purgatory anywhere in the Bible? Is it anywhere in
No, the word purgatory is nowhere in the Bible. It actually wasn't even codified until the 1200s. So that's late. So Jesus dies in 30. Well, heck, that's like a long time after Jesus's. But there are references to praying for souls that presumably are in another place in the Bible. So there are references to that, but it's not called purgatory.
What is it called?
So there's, in the book of Daniel, there's references to prayers said for souls that have passed on. And there are also, I'm trying to remember in the New Testament where this is. I will have to give that to you because for some reason I used to know it, but I
Okay.
not. But Yeah. But no, in the Bible, there's nothing that references purgatory.
No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.